Welcome to the SUSJ panel discussion on education, immigration, climate justice, and saving ethnic studies. Students United for Socioeconomic Justice was created on October 2011, in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street to bring awareness of the social impact of the economic crisis and advocate for solutions. This semester we have chosen to focus on the two campaigns, Climate Justice and Divest UTSA and OccupyEducation. Tonight we're going to hear from several student activists and leaders discussing some of society's most pressing issues of immigration, climate justice, and the battle to save ethnic studies in Texas, and how you can become a part of the solution. Our first speaker, Daniel Arriaga, is a senior pursuing a degree in political science. He has been involved with LULAC and is currently working in the San Antonio office of Representative Pete Gallego. He has served as a student mentor through the UTSA office P20 initiatives for the past 2 years, working to enable students to develop and complete their educational goals at Travis Early College High School and throughout the greater San Antonio community. He will discuss aspects of the current immigration reform measures. Thank you for being here tonight.
Hello, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Like she said, my name is Daniel Arriaga. First of all, thank you to SUSJ for inviting me here to speak. Without that anybody wanting to hear me speak is pretty nice, so thank you for that. Obviously, thank you to my fellow panelists. They're all going to be talking about, obviously, very important issues, any of which I'd be more than happy to discuss. But I was specifically asked to speak on immigration and globalization. And obviously, globalization is a huge topic, and no short presentation like this is going to adequately cover it. But as it relates to immigration, one of the things that really came to my mind when I was approaching this, I don't know why it always sticks in the back of my mind, is remittances. And obviously remittances, for those of you who don't know, is basically when someone leaves their home and they travel to a different country, they immigrate to another country, they are taking with them not just their lives, but also their livelihood. So when they earn a living in that country, they are going to transport money, funds back home to their home country, and that's actually a huge part of the global economy. So it's actually 3 times that of all foreign assistance. It's greater than the direct investment in many countries. So that money is a huge part of what makes the global economy function. But this, however, does underscore, I think, what's a much bigger problem in the much bigger imbalance in the global trading regime, which is that in the past 3 decades, U.S. financial institutions in particular have advocated for what they call the free flow of capital. Basically, indeed, they have become the champions of the rights of capital over the rights of workers. So, and of course, if you were to ask the question, what's of greater importance to global efficiency and raising living standards all over the world, there's no comparison. The movement of capital or the movement of labor would obviously be has the potential for dramatically improving the quality of life and the quality and the standard of living around the world. So why hasn't this happened? Why don't we have a liberalization of labor? Why don't we have free movement of labor? Why does it take potentially 28 years to earn citizenship in a country like the United States, even if you get it at all? We don't even have mobility for skilled immigrants. I was going to say that. If you're going to be discriminatory, you think at least you'd be discriminatory in keeping skilled, educated immigrants, but we hardly even do that. We send them away. So why is that? And so obviously the big asymmetry here is in the case of labor mobility, it's the developing countries that benefit. In the case of capital, it's the advanced industrial countries that benefit. The advanced industrial countries have been controlling the rules of the game for a very long time, and more accurately, the special interests in the advanced industrialized countries. So, so they focus on flexibility and liberalization of capital, but there's no interest of opening up the movement of labor. The rights to unionize, to engage in collective bargaining, or to strike have all been suppressed. Meanwhile, the fundamental rights of the owners of capital to freely move into or out of countries has never been greater. So in the United States, we have seen an enormous shift of power away from labor and towards capital. We see this every day, mostly in the consequences of low and stagnant wages. So this is not uniquely an American problem, but on the surface, American workers have considerably less bargaining power than their fellow workers in other wealthy industrialized countries. The best way to moderate the effects of that would be for government to intervene in the distribution of pre-tax income for those at the bottom, or simply offer direct investment. But as we now know, that's not the case. The dramatic irony is that just as markets began delivering more unequal outcomes in favor of those at the top, government began asking less and less of those at the top. And that, not the least of which, is a halving of the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 35%. So today, we haven't moderated the unbalanced shift in favor of capital. In fact, we've made it far worse. This has undoubtedly contributed to the growing inequality in our society. So when combined with the mobility of labor and capital and the inequality experienced by the anemic American worker, the plight of the undocumented immigrant could not be more challenging. They have to battle all these forces that I've described. So Saskia Sassen, a Dutch-born sociologist actually and economist, has done an incredible job of analyzing the development of globalization over the course of the past few decades. Tim actually recommended that I include some of her work, obviously, in today's discussion, and I'm now a big fan, so thank you for that. One of the things that she raised is that the classical theories of free trade and comparative advantage were designed in such a way that they are now in direct conflict with the world that we know today. They assumed international mobility of commodities, so in essence world trade, but the immobility of capital and labor. So people and the goods would stay placed, and the only thing that would move around was obviously, or excuse me, the people and the capital would stay in place, and the only thing that moved around were the goods. While this rise in capital exports can really be traced back to obviously 19th century, Britain and India or something like that, massive increase in global investment flows to developing countries, to third world countries, really began in the 1960s by these multinational corporations. So, which is obviously only intensified as time has gone on. The penetration of capital into the third world and developing countries had the unfortunate effects of disrupting those local communities, exploiting workers, disproportionately young women, obviously, for a new cheap labor force, whether it's in Juarez, Dhaka, Shanghai, Guangzhou, you name it. And Sassen actually took it a bit further. She actually tried to link it to the expansion and the upsurge in international migration. In other words, obviously the prevailing assumptions of why immigration occurs, whether it's poverty, whether it's overpopulation, even economic stagnation, cannot adequately explain why people move from their country to another country. So why we think people generally move, get up and leave, may not necessarily be exactly the whole story. So even if in a country like Mexico, where all these factors, a lot of these factors are definitely evident, we have to be willing to take a step back and recognize the broader framework and the broader economic realities that exist. So beginning in the 1960s, obviously there was a sharp rise in immigration to the United States, largely from Latin America, Southeast Asia. And these countries were not, just random countries. They were countries that we had directly involved ourselves in militarily, economically, politically. And the idea, at least from a policy perspective, at least among some people, is that if you were to invest foreign capital, if you were to invest in these countries, then you're going to deter a lot of immigration, because obviously at the time, voices in the government were very concerned about the huge influx of immigration that was coming into the country. So the idea was that if you give foreign investments, then you're going to deter these people. But actually, it actually had the opposite effect. Paradoxically, it had the opposite effect. Many of these countries that had the highest growth rates were actually countries that were sending the most immigrants to the United States. And the reason, obviously, according to Sassen, is that the national boundaries do not act as barriers, so much as mechanisms for reproducing the system that already exists. In other words, the national borders are mechanisms for creating a worldwide labor reserve for global capital. Immigrant labor is a distinct category of labor. So in other words, it's in its own ballpark, it's in its own field. She described it as labor as particularly a form of powerlessness, noteworthy for increasing role in the tertiary, which is the service sector of the economy. Because, in other words, you don't export a haircut, or you don't export manicure. You can't export these things. So in developed countries, you can use this cheap form of labor, and obviously, in developed countries like the United States, you can use this cheap form of labor in a service sector economy. and obviously you can shift the manufacturing over to these developing countries. So you really have two sides of the same coin. And that's what I was actually talking to some of my fellow panelists here about this earlier, is that really in reality, the workers struggle, and I think this is one of the things that doesn't get described very often, is that the workers' struggle here in the United States is directly tied into the struggle of immigrants all over the world and who are traveling to these countries or who are being exploited in their own countries. So in reality, I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of this moral system, but suffice it to say that multinationals have global financial citizenship. In other words, these companies, these corporations can move their goods, their capital anywhere around the world. But any immigrants, any transnational immigrants cannot. And so this is highly disruptive. It uproots traditional modes of existence. It has displaced farmers, rural wage laborers, and transformed them into migrant workers, into urban wage laborers, and what I like to refer to as wage slaves. So finally, I know I've probably been going on and on for too long, but I want to leave you with a quote by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. And he's an op-ed contributor for the New York Times on occasion. So he said, "Imagine for a moment what the world would be like if there was free mobility of labor, but no mobility of capital. Countries would compete to attract workers. They would promise good schools and good government, as well as low taxes on their workers. This could be financed by high taxes on capital. But that's not the world we live in. And that's partly because the 1% don't want it that way. And so it comes to no surprise as me that we're asking people to potentially wait, I was talking about this, like 13 years, and maintain a second-class citizenship. And then at that, to even maybe have a chance into the middle class, which again is shrinking. They're getting less, they're having less at any time in our history. Like I was saying earlier, the bottom 60% of our population maintains a mere 2.3% of the wealth in this country. The Latino community has lost 66% of their wealth in the past 10 years. So we're asking people to potentially wait 13 years to to maybe have a chance to fight for that 2.3%. That's what we're really proposing here. I think that's what Diego's going to talk about, so I'll go ahead and yield the floor to him. But thank you, everybody, for being here.
Our second speaker, Diego Armancha, is currently a sophomore pursuing a degree in Mexican-American Studies. He has been involved with the San Antonio Immigrant Youth Movement and has worked diligently to advocate for dreamers, their families, and undocumented workers. Tonight, Diego will also give us his analysis of current immigration reform and how it affects undocumented youth. Thank you, Diego.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. I know it's fiesta and it's difficult to not participate, so thank you. There will be around 1,400 people deported today. That's a pretty large number of people that will not get to see their parents, that will not get to see their children, that will not get to see their nieces, their grandchildren. So how many in this room here are going to be able to go home today with no fear of deportation, of anything of that matter? So it's evident that the immigration system in this country is broken. It's been badly broken for a while, and this is the right time to fix it. It has been this miserable for way too long, I believe. So I was unable to read the 844 pages of the document, so I got the condensed version. But the first step in immigration reform that the Gang of Eight, which is made up of eight Democrat senators and 8 Republican senators, is tackling the border issue. So they would like to up security in the border, the Mexico border I'm talking about, including a rate of 90% security, which is kind of a really strange figure. I don't know how you would contribute and mark that. I don't know how you would find a success rate for that. That's one of the issues. So it would be securing the border, making sure that out of 9 people, or 10 people that are trying to cross the border, 9 don't get in. Which, I mean, they have to go off some sort of number. They would like to also include fencing plan, which would be mandatory and operational, which would raise the height and would broaden the current fencing plan that's in the border. We would also try to train the forces that are responsible for maintaining border safety, such as ICE and USCIS, by training them in civil rights and hopefully reducing the human rights violations that are seen daily all along the border. The second big step is it would allow for approximately 11.5 million undocumented workers in the United States a pathway to citizenship. So pathway to citizenship is kind of a really big deal because a lot of people like to call it amnesty. But in my eyes, it's not amnesty because these people have been here for several years, have been paying their taxes, have been working. They are contributing members of our society. They just aren't recognized. They have no voice in a lot of things. They can't vote. They can't claim any Social Security benefits, any benefits whatsoever, and they're afraid. So the main thing that I like about this bill is that it would allow to give all those people a voice. It would allow all these individuals, such as myself, a pathway to a country that has really adopted us in an unorthodox manner. So what the bill proposes is that these 11.5 million people, such as myself, could apply for a registered provisional immigration status, which just means that we would be able to travel the country, travel back home, which is a huge deal. Some of us have not seen our families for God knows years. I haven't seen my dad in 11 years. I'm not too excited to see him, but it's been 11 years since I've seen him. And there's people that you hear stories that they haven't seen their parents in 25 years, 20 years, and it's really sad to hear about those things because who doesn't want to see their parents? Who doesn't want to see their mom, their grandpa? So the way that is planned that would give citizenship is if you qualify, you meet certain criteria. So you can't have been convicted of any crime. You are not seen as a potential terrorist in the eyes of the United States government, so I don't know what constitutes a terrorist or potential terrorist, but you're either an agricultural worker, you have been in the country before December 12, 2011, you have paid your taxes, and if you haven't, you're going to have to pay those taxes back, which doesn't seem very reasonable because they're not giving a date as to how many years back you have to pay those taxes. So it's a backlog that could be 5 years, 6 years, depending on the people. And a lot of the members of the community are not very wealthy because usually they are forced into low-skilled jobs. So these are jobs where they have to support their family, and then on top of that, if this does go through, pay a lot of money. It's a lot of money that a lot of people don't have. I know I don't have this kind of money right now. So there's 3 direct paths. There's a dreamer path, there's an agricultural worker path, and then there's a regular, you're undocumented and you don't qualify under either of them path. The dreamer path, which means a dreamer is someone who's undocumented, usually college student such as myself, that is currently working on a degree, trying to educate themselves, has been in the country since before 2007, hasn't been convicted of any crimes, any of those things. So the dreamer path is by far the quickest path to citizenship, and it's approximately 5 years. You have to have gotten a a high school diploma or GED. You have to complete at least 2 years of college or serve in the U.S. military for 4 years, which that's very rare to see anyone that served in the military. And then you have to pay back those taxes that if you've been working under the table. You have to pay a fee. The fee, I believe, is $1,000 that you pay over the lifespan, over the span of 6 years. And then you would get a green card. A green card just means that you're a legal resident of this country. Right after you get your green card, you are eligible to apply for citizenship, which, I mean, that's around 1.2 million people that could benefit from this path. However, that's not everyone. The agricultural worker class is approximately 8 years, and it institutes that you have to work in the country for at least 100 days or 575 hours, which is very difficult for an agriculture worker to say, oh, I've worked this many hours and this many days, because you don't clock in like a regular job. You don't come in and, oh, hey, I'm working 8 to 5 today. It's usually the sun comes up until the sun goes down. So it's very difficult for agricultural workers to show that they've worked this amount of time. It's also very difficult to show that they pay taxes, because sometimes agricultural workers don't make enough money to where they're required to pay taxes, or they're below the poverty line. They don't know how to pay taxes. Different issues that are affecting people being able to apply for taxes, being able to pay taxes. So that's one of the paths. Then you would get a blue card, which I don't understand why blue, but they chose blue. And 5 years would happen. 5 years would go down, and then you could apply for a green card. And then once you get a green card, you have to show proof that you have you meet certain criteria. There's a lot of criteria just once you get your green card. So you have to show that you are above the poverty line, which is around below $10,000. That you have not been. You can't even apply for federal aid for any program. So you have to show that you've been working constantly, that you've been employed, or that you're above the poverty line. Exactly. Another thing that the current proposal of immigration reform tackles is a visa system that is currently incredibly messy. It would take visas from a family-based visa system to a merit-based visa system, which means that if you're a doctor,